All right, LSU in South Carolina coming up from Tiger Stadium on Saturday night. Been a minute since LSU was on the field. Those bye weeks early in the season tend to kind of kill a little bit of momentum, I think. Everybody's ready for a bye week in the old one bye week seasons. You get to, Halloween. You've got 8 games in the bank. It might be time to decompress a little bit. It feels like you were just picking up steam with conference play, and then boom, you got to take a week off. But it's time to get back into it and start talking about games that will be played. And LSU and South Carolina will do battle on Saturday night at 6:45. I do a piece for LouisianaSports.net for all the conference weeks called A Series History, and I just kind of go through notable games and moments in the LSU South Carolina and the history of whatever that opponent is for the week. And this week, I really did learn some things. If I know Auburn's coming up, you know what's coming. Earthquake, cigar, barn burning, interceptions, leverage. They're infinite. Not infinite, that's incorrect. It's very finite. But there are a lot of instances that you can point to in that series that you automatically go to. I did it for Florida a few weeks ago, and you talk about 97, sure. You talk about the Spurrier dominance of the 90s, sure. You talk about the fake punt with Brad Wing, sure. You talk about the fake field goal in the Swamp or the fake field goal in Baton Rouge, sure. You talk about the Hurricane game where things got moved and LSU got stopped at the 1-yard line. You talk about, of course, 2007 and the 4th downs. You can point to those games in these series histories. You can also do that with Ole Miss, as did a couple of weeks ago. You go back to Billy Cannon, you go back to Eli, you go back to Archie Who, Odell Beckham kick return 2 years ago, the ridiculous track meet. You automatically recall a lot of these series, right? In South Carolina, if I put you on the spot and give me the LSU South Carolina history, I think most people will be like, not a lot. And that's fair because there haven't been a lot of games. There have only been, in the history of this series, 23 games. South Carolina joined the SEC in 1992. They were not permanent opponents with LSU. There's not a ton of history to go back on, but there were some games that I do remember, but they produced a couple things that maybe you might have forgotten. Maybe not. Maybe I'm underestimating you, but maybe you have. And I went back and kind of wrote about it a little bit at LouisianaSports.net. I kind of wanted to get into it before we got into the X's and O's and the matchups of what exactly this game's going to look like on Saturday. There's some interesting things on a trip down memory lane with LSU and South Carolina. I'll tell you this. LSU has had their fair share of success against the Gamecocks. 23 all-time games, 20 wins for LSU, 2 wins for South Carolina, 1 tie. South Carolina's lone win over LSU since 1930 came in 1994 in Baton Rouge. And since then, LSU tied South Carolina in 1995, and the Tigers have won 8 in a row in that series. And in that 8, there have been some interesting storylines. Do you all remember in 2015, LSU was set to go to Columbia to play South Carolina, but flooding was catastrophic in the Low Country there in South Carolina, and the game had to be moved. So on Wednesday of that week, the decision was made to move the game from Columbia to Baton Rouge. So LSU sold some tickets. They donated all those proceeds back to Baton Rouge, back to Columbia. But there were only 50,000 people at this game. They put the South Carolina entrance on the Jumbotron pregame and tried to do what they could, but it was an LSU home game with half capacity. And Leonard Fournette ran for 158 yards in 3 quarters of play. LSU in that game ran for 396 yards. 396 yards in that game. And afterward, Steve Spurrier gave this quote: "I just get frustrated watching our guys. Their guys must have broken 8 tackles on their big runs. Our guys go in there and just fall on the ground. Nobody tackles them." And that was the last game Steve Spurrier ever coached. 3 days after LSU ran for almost 400 yards on South Carolina when they had been displaced from a flood in October, Steve Spurrier said, "I'm done." And that was it for Steve Spurrier. So I think that is an interesting footnote. But that's not the only time that LSU and South Carolina have played each other in a half-empty stadium in Baton Rouge. No, they did that in 2020. We had the COVID regulations. We had the social distancing. I was just working for the LSU Sports Radio Network at the time. I was not doing LouisianaSports.net and did not have this show. So I was just ticketed from LSU radio, and I was sitting out with the mask on in the stands with those of you that were there. And if you'll remember, TJ Finley got the start that night. LSU was dealing with the injury issues. Miles Brennan had gone out with that issue with his, the injury he suffered against Missouri, whatever it was. And they went to Finley, who became the 8th true freshman quarterback to start a game at LSU since World War II that night. And all LSU did was go out and score 52 points on South Carolina and beat them 52-24. In that game, LSU scored on offense, defense, and special teams. Eli Ricks had a pick 6 in that game as a freshman. And Trey Palmer, cousin Trey, we've got a lot of speed in the family, as you all know. Trey Palmer ran the first kickoff for a touchdown back in Tiger Stadium since Dalton Hilliard in 1981 that night, a span of 29 years. And it was done in front of basically nobody in a COVID-emptied stadium against South Carolina. So 2 instances fairly recently in the last 10 years that LSU has played South Carolina in a half-empty Tiger Stadium. 2012, I'll go back to this game. This is a game I remember very vividly. I was covering the team for Bayou Bengals Insider at the time. And LSU was coming off that magical year in 2011 and went out and just didn't do a lot against Auburn and ended up squeaking out a win on the Plains with Zach Mettenberger and Jarvis Landry, Odell Beckham, Jeremy Hill, and that great defense with Eric Reed and Kevin Minner and Harold Simon and Benny Logan and Barkevius Mingo, Sam Montgomery, Kevin Minner, all those guys. They're playing great defense. They couldn't score. And they barely got out of Auburn alive. And then they went to Florida and got beat by Will Muschamp's Florida team, who ran it with Mike Gillislee 9,000 times. And LSU couldn't score. And they lost a couple of offensive linemen in the process. And you were playing South Carolina, who was undefeated, ranked 3rd in the country, Jadeveon Clowney, Marcus Lattimore, Stephon Gilmore, like a really, really, really good team for South Carolina. And the thought was, well, they're not going to be able to block Clowney because they don't have any tackles. And, like, this South Carolina team is just better than this LSU team. We thought this was a great LSU team. Coming off 2011, you changed quarterbacks, but you got a lot of everybody else back. And LSU came out that night in Tiger Stadium with Josh Durasic playing left tackle for the first time in his career, a 60-year senior who had been a guard playing left tackle. You put Trey Turner and Vidal Alexander on the right side of the line, both freshmen. And you ran the ball on them. You leaned on them a little bit. Defense played great, and LSU won the game 23-21. Connor Shaw threw a late interception to Eric Reed. And I think a lot of you remember that game. You'll probably remember the Clowney game. And you remember that LSU started some different offensive linemen, and all that might ring a bell. I did not remember this. This was the game, South Carolina 2012, where Les Miles said this was Death Valley, the place where opponents' dreams come to die. And I remember that quote vividly. I could give you that whenever. But I didn't really pin it to the South Carolina game in 2012. That's when Les Miles said it. And then you go to last year's game, which was pretty wild. I think it'll probably get kind of buried in LSU history because South Carolina is not a big rival because LSU didn't accomplish much last year. It just wasn't that big a deal in December. But it was a big win for LSU. You realize, like, game day showed up in Columbia last year for the first time in 10 years. It had been 10 years since game day went to Columbia. And then they put the kickoff time at 11 o'clock Central, 12 o'clock Eastern. So game day led into LSU, South Carolina. And immediately, South Carolina goes up 17-0. 17-0. And at that point, you're not thinking much is going to come from it. But Garrett Nussmeier led LSU down the field. Put some points on the board. Caden Durham emerged his first, like, real action as the LSU starting running back. And then Lenora Sellers got hurt. And LSU forced a couple turnovers. Robbie Ashford came in. And, yeah, you got a little bit of help on an interception that was a pick 6 that was called back for the block on Nussmeier. But you won the game, 36-33. And that's probably the game that matters the most on Saturday because Sellers is back, and Nussmeier's back, and Durham's back, and Shane Beamer is back, and Joe Sloan is back, and Blake Baker is back. Now they've got a different offensive coordinator. Dal Loggins moved on, head coach at Appalachian State. They've got Mike Shula, who's in some hot water over there right now because they're not moving the ball. But a lot of the same characters, including Dylan Stewart, are back from that game last year. And you've got a lot of high-end talent in this game, but you've also got a pair of offenses that are really struggling and some real talent on defense that is going to have to try to carry their team to a victory with two very experienced quarterbacks that we considered entering this season to be among the Heisman frontrunners, to be among the top 10 pick discussion when next spring rolls around. And so, again, not an earth-shattering look here, not as much fun as maybe memory lane against Alabama or Florida or Auburn or even Arkansas or Ole Miss. But I thought some interesting nuggets to pull from what has been a short history between LSU and South Carolina, but one that's kind of packed with some interesting storylines and some games you won't soon forget. I don't think you soon forget the South Carolina flood game where they come here. I don't think you soon forget the COVID year when TJ Finley started. I don't think you soon forget Death Valley where opponents' dreams come to die. Like, those are things that still live on, but you may not have immediately, or I certainly didn't with the Les Miles quote, tie them right back to South Carolina. We'll see those two teams going at it in Tiger Stadium on Saturday night. Incidentally, in Tiger Stadium, LSU is 13-1 all-time against South Carolina. They one time the two teams did not play in the regular season, 1987 Gator Bowl. LSU and South Carolina. LSU won that one. Hey, thanks for watching Hunt on LSU. Before you get out of here, do us a couple of favors. Hit that like button, leave your comments below, and subscribe to the channel for all your Fighting Tiger football talk. See you next time.